The sky above Vargas 9 burned with the glow of distant explosions. The once gray clouds were now painted orange by the never-ending war. Smoke filled the air, mixing with the scent of metal, blood, and fire. The ground was cracked and broken, littered with wreckage from fallen ships, and lifeless bodies of soldiers from both sides. Captain Elias Carter moved carefully through the ruins. His armored boots crunched over shattered glass and pieces of metal as he scanned the area with sharp eyes. His rifle was ready in his hands, but there were no enemies in sight, for now. He had crash-landed here 6 hours ago after his ship was shot down. His squad was gone. Maybe dead, maybe captured. He didn't know. But he wasn't going to give up. Humans never gave up. His only goal was to survive. Elias tapped the side of his helmet, activating his scanner. The holographic display inside his visor flickered, showing weak energy signals nearby. Most were wreckage, but one caught his attention. A life sign. A survivor. Cautiously, he moved toward the signal. His grip tightened on his rifle as he passed a destroyed Zorthan dropship. The Zorthans were Earth's enemies. Tall, strong, reptilian-like warriors with blue skin and golden eyes. They believed they were the superior race. To them, humans were nothing but weak creatures that didn't deserve to rule the stars. Elias knew better. As he stepped around a broken engine, he finally saw the source of the life sign. A Zorthan female, lying in the dirt, barely alive. Her armor was cracked, and deep wounds covered her body. Her breathing was weak, and her golden eyes were half open, filled with pain. Blood, dark violet in color, dripped from a wound on her forehead. She was dying. Elias hesitated. Zorthans had no mercy for humans. They killed without hesitation. If their roles were reversed, she would have left him to die without a second thought. But he was not a Zorthan. With a sigh, he lowered his weapon and knelt beside her. He reached into his belt and pulled out a medpack. The female's eyes widened in shock. "You?" Her voice was weak, but the disbelief was clear. "Stay still," Elias muttered as he sprayed biofoam over her wounds. The foam sealed the cuts instantly, stopping the bleeding. He pulled out a bandage and wrapped it around her arm, securing another deep wound. The Zorthan winced but didn't fight back. She was too weak. "Why?" "Help me," she whispered. Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he checked her vitals on his scanner. Her heart rate was dropping, but she would live, if he got her to safety. Finally, he sighed, "Because I don't leave people behind." The Zorthan let out a weak, bitter laugh. "I am not. Your people." "Doesn't matter," Elias replied. The wind howled through the wreckage, carrying the distant sounds of battle. Elias looked up at the sky. Enemy ships still controlled the air. His chances of escape were slim, but he wasn't going to give up. He looked back at the Zorthan. "Can you walk?" She tried to move but collapsed with a sharp gasp. Her body was too weak. Elias muttered a curse under his breath. He had two choices: leave her here to die, or carry her with him. He shook his head. There was no choice. Without another word, he reached down and lifted her into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, but he adjusted his grip and started walking. The Zorthan's eyes fluttered open in shock. "What are you doing?" "Getting you out of here." She struggled weakly. "No, this is shameful. I am a warrior." "Yeah. Well, right now you're just a person who needs help," Elias said firmly. "So shut up and let me do my job." The Zorthan stared at him for a long moment, then sighed, her body relaxing against him. She was too tired to argue. As Elias moved through the battlefield, he kept his rifle ready. He didn't trust that they were alone. The sky above flashed with energy blasts. Somewhere, a distant explosion shook the ground. The war was still raging, but for now, Elias had only one mission: to keep himself and this Zorthan alive. The Zorthan's voice broke the silence. "You? What is your name, human?" "Elias. Captain Elias Carter." She hesitated, then spoke. I am Tilani, of the Zorthan High Guard. Elias smirked. Well, Tilani, welcome to the worst day of your life. She gave a weak chuckle. I believe that day started long before this. Despite the situation, Elias found himself grinning. Maybe this alien wasn't so bad. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't his enemy anymore. For now, survival was all that mattered. Elias moved carefully through the wreckage, carrying Tilani in his arms. His muscles ached, but he didn't slow down. The battlefield was too dangerous to rest. The Zorthan female remained quiet, her head resting against his shoulder. Her breathing was shallow, but her golden eyes stayed open, watching him. She was still weak, but Elias knew she was fighting to stay conscious. Why are you doing this? She finally asked. Elias sighed. I told you, I don't leave people behind. Heleni's jaw tightened. I am not people. I am your enemy. Elias smirked. Then I guess I'm making a bad decision. She stared at him for a moment, then looked away. Silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of battle. A dangerous path. Elias spotted an abandoned bunker up ahead, half buried in the dirt. It was old, probably from the first wave of fighting on Vargas 9, but it was still standing. Almost there, he muttered. Tilani stirred. Put me down. I can walk. Elias raised an eyebrow. You sure? Yes. He hesitated, then gently set her down. She winced, but stood on shaky legs. Elias kept his hands ready in case she fell. She took one step, then another. Her pride wouldn't let her show weakness, but Elias could see the pain in her face. Tilani took a deep breath. Let's go. They moved toward the bunker, stepping over broken metal and fallen bodies. The entrance was half open, just enough for them to slip inside. Inside, the air was stale, but it was safe. The walls were cracked, and the power was long dead, but it was shelter. Elias sighed in relief. All right, we rest here. Tilani lowered herself against the wall, her breathing heavy. You should have left me, she muttered. Elias shook his head. Not happening. She clenched her fists. You do not understand, human. In my culture, if someone saves your life, you belong to them. I belong to you now. Elias froze. What? She lifted her gaze to him. I am your slave. A human's refusal. Elias laughed, shaking his head. Yeah, that's not happening. Tilani frowned. You have no choice. I swore my life to you. Elias crossed his arms. Listen, I don't know how things work with your people, but humans don't do that. I didn't save you to own you. Tilani looked confused. Then, why? Elias sighed. Because it was the right thing to do. She blinked, as if the idea was strange to her. You are different from what I was taught. Elias sat across from her, leaning against the wall. What did they teach you? That humans are weak. That you fear death and beg for mercy. That you have no honor. She paused. But you do not seem weak. Elias smirked. Thanks, I guess. Tilani looked at the floor. But my vow remains. I owe you my life. You may command me as you wish. Elias sighed. I don't need a slave. I need a teammate. If we're going to survive, we do it together. Understand? Tilani hesitated, then nodded slowly. Good, Elias said. Now get some rest. We'll need to move soon. The hunt begins. Outside the bunker, something moved in the shadows. A group of Zorthan soldiers scanned the battlefield, searching for survivors. Their leader, a tall warrior named Commander Vokar, knelt beside a broken ship. His golden eyes narrowed as he touched the ground, feeling the faint warmth of fresh footprints. Someone was here, he growled. A human, and one of our own. He stood and turned to his soldiers. Find them. Kill the human. Bring the traitor back alive. The soldiers nodded and moved forward, their weapons ready. The hunt had begun. A warrior's promise. Inside the bunker, Tilani woke with a start. Her sharp hearing picked up the sound of movement outside. "We are being followed," she whispered. Elias grabbed his rifle. "How many?" Tilani closed her eyes, focusing. "At least 6. Elias cursed. "We need to move." Tilani sat up. "I will fight." Elias looked at her wounds. "You're not in good shape." "I am still a warrior." She met his gaze. "And I will not let my master die." Elias sighed. "I told you, I'm not your master." Tilani smirked. "Then let us say, I do not wish to lose the man who saved me." Elias chuckled. "That's better." He checked his ammo. 5 shots left. Not enough. "We'll have to be smart," he said. "No direct fights. We sneak out and lose them." Tilani nodded. "Lead the way." Elias moved toward the bunker door, then glanced back at her. "Hey, Tilani." "Yes. If we get out of this alive, you're free. No more debt. No more vows." She was silent for a moment, then smiled softly. "We shall see, human." With that, they slipped into the darkness, the enemy close behind. The cold wind of Vargas 9 howled through the ruins, carrying the distant sounds of gunfire and explosions. The war had not stopped, but for Elias and Tilani, there was a new danger. Zorthan hunters were after them. Inside the dark bunker, Elias checked his rifle. 5 shots left. Not good. Tilani, though still injured, sat beside him, listening carefully. Her sharp hearing caught every sound outside. "They are close," she whispered. 6 of them. Elias exhaled slowly. "Then we better move fast." Tilani nodded. "Follow me. I know how they hunt." Despite her wounds, she moved like a trained warrior, silent and careful. Elias followed, his grip tight on his rifle. Trusting a Zorthan wasn't easy, but he didn't have a choice. They slipped out through a broken section of the bunker wall, entering the ruins of an old battlefield. Smoke covered the air, hiding them, but also making it harder to see. Elias tapped his helmet, activating his scanner. A red warning flashed. 6 heat signatures, moving fast. "They're spreading out," Elias whispered, "trying to trap us." Tilani's jaw tightened. "Then we must break their formation." The first strike. A shadow moved on their left, a Zorthan soldier, scanning the area with a plasma rifle. Elias signaled to Tilani. She nodded and moved low, sneaking behind the enemy. Even injured, she was fast. The Zorthan turned, too late. Tilani struck, grabbing his throat and twisting it. The soldier collapsed without a sound. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Remind me not to make you mad." Tilani smirked. "Then do not give me a reason." They moved quickly, using the cover of smoke and ruins. 1 enemy down, 5 to go. A close call. Elias took the lead, guiding them through the wreckage of a destroyed human dropship. The metal creaked under his boots, and for a moment, he froze. Had they heard that? A voice shouted in Zorthan. "They know we're here," Tilani whispered. Elias cursed. No time to run now. "Get ready," he said, raising his rifle. 3 Zorthan soldiers appeared from the smoke, weapons aimed. Tilani growled. "They will not take us alive." Elias smirked. "Yeah, that's the plan." Before the enemy could fire, Elias dropped to one knee and pulled the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. 3 precise shots. 2 Zorthans fell, the third staggered back. Tilani lunged, using her claws to finish him off. Elias reloaded. 2 enemies left. The commander arrives. A deep, rumbling voice echoed through the ruins. "Tilani of the High Guard, you shame your people." Elias turned. A tall figure stepped forward. Commander Vokar, leader of the Zorthan squad. His golden eyes burned with anger. Tilani stiffened. "Vokar, you fight beside a human." Vokar's voice was full of disgust. "You are no longer Zorthan. Tilani clenched her fists. I follow my oath. My life belongs to him. Vokar sneered. Then you are a traitor. He raised his plasma blade, the blue light glowing against the darkness. And traitors die. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle. You sure talk a lot. Vokar lunged. The final battle. Elias dove aside as the plasma blade slashed through the air, barely missing him. The heat from the weapon burned his armor. Tilani attacked, blocking Vokar's next strike with her own arm. The blade cut her, but she didn't flinch. She pushed back, forcing Vokar to stumble. Elias fired, but Vokar was fast. He dodged the shot and kicked Elias hard, sending him crashing into a broken wall. Tilani roared in charge. The two Zorthans clashed, warrior against warrior. Vokar was stronger, but Tilani was faster. She dodged his heavy swings and countered with sharp, precise strikes. But Vokar was not alone. The last Zorthan soldier raised his rifle, aiming at Tilani. Elias saw it. He had one shot left. He took the shot. Bang! The soldier collapsed, but the sound distracted Tilani for a second, long enough for Vokar to strike. The plasma blade cut across her side. She gasped in pain, falling to her knees. Vokar raised his weapon for the final blow. Die with honor. Elias moved. He tackled Vokar, slamming into him with full force. The two crashed onto the ground, rolling through the dirt. Vokar was stronger, but Elias had something else, determination. He grabbed a metal shard from the ground and stabbed it into Vokar's leg. The Zorthan howled in pain. Tilani, bleeding but still standing, grabbed a fallen plasma blade and drove it through Vokar's chest. The Zorthan commander gasped, golden eyes wide with shock. You betrayed your people. Tilani whispered, No, I chose my own path. With one final push, she ended it. Vokar fell. A new path. Silence filled the ruins. The battle was over. Elias sat up, groaning. That was fun. Tilani chuckled weakly. You are insane, human. Elias grinned. Takes one to know one. She smiled, but then her face grew serious. I made my choice today. I do not belong to the Zorthans anymore. Elias nodded. Then what do you belong to? Tilani looked at him, eyes full of determination. To my own future. Elias smirked. Then let's make sure you have one. They stood, wounded but alive. The war was not over, but they had won this fight, together. The ruins of Vargas 9 were silent again. The battle was over. For now. Elias wiped sweat from his forehead and took a deep breath. His body ached from the fight, but at least he was still breathing. Tilani stood beside him, pressing a hand against her bleeding side. Her golden eyes remained sharp despite the pain. Elias glanced at her wound. You all right? She exhaled slowly. I have had worse. Yeah, I doubt that. She gave him a small smirk, but then her expression turned serious. More soldiers will come soon. Vokar's team was only a scout unit. Elias nodded. Then we need to get out of here. Tilani looked toward the distance. The sky was filled with burning ships and falling debris. Is there anywhere safe? Elias tapped his wrist device. The screen flickered, barely functional. A weak signal flashed, a human distress beacon. There's a crashed human ship a few kilometers from here, Elias said. If we can reach it, maybe we can call for help. Tilani hesitated. If we go there, more Zorthans will follow. Elias sighed. Yeah, but staying here is worse. She nodded. Then let us move. Through enemy territory. Elias led the way, moving carefully through the ruins. Tilani followed, her breathing controlled despite her wound. The battlefield was filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Broken mechs, fallen soldiers, and wrecked ships lay scattered everywhere. Tilani suddenly raised a fist, signaling Elias to stop. Elias froze and listened. Footsteps. Not human. Not friendly. Zorthan patrol. Elias ducked behind a broken vehicle, pulling Tileni down with him. Through the smoke, he spotted 3 Zorthan soldiers, scanning the area with their rifles. "They are searching for survivors," Tileni whispered. Elias frowned. "Think we can sneak past them?" Tileni shook her head. "No. They will sense us. Zorthans can smell blood." Elias sighed. "Then we need a distraction." He scanned the wreckage and saw a damaged energy cell from a fallen Zorthan fighter. Still active, still dangerous. Elias grabbed a small piece of metal and threw it toward the energy cell. Boom! The explosion shook the ground, sending debris flying. The Zorthan soldiers immediately turned toward the noise, weapons ready. "Now," Elias whispered. They moved quickly, using the smoke to cover their escape. The Zorthans never saw them. The crashed ship. After nearly an hour of careful movement, they finally reached their destination. The crashed human dropship lay half buried in the dirt, its metal body torn apart. Smoke still rose from the wreckage, but the distress beacon was still active. Elias climbed inside, checking the controls. The radio was damaged, but repairable. Tileni stood guard at the entrance. "How long?" Elias worked fast, reconnecting wires. "A few minutes." Tileni's ears twitched. "We may not have a few minutes." Elias looked up. "More Zorthans." She nodded. "I hear them in the distance. They are coming." Elias cursed and worked faster. Almost done. Tileni tightened her grip on a fallen soldier's plasma rifle. "Then I will buy you time." Elias looked at her. She was injured, exhausted, and outnumbered. And yet she was still ready to fight. "You sure about this?" he asked. She smiled slightly. "I belong to my own future now, and I will fight for it." Elias smirked. "Then let's make sure you have a future to fight for." He handed her a grenade. "Just in case." She took it and nodded. "Good luck, human." The last stand. Tileni stepped outside the wreckage, rifle ready. The Zorthan patrol had arrived. 6 warriors, weapons drawn. One of them, a scared warrior, narrowed his eyes. "Tileni, you still live." Tileni raised her rifle. "Not for long if you have your way." The warrior growled. "You betrayed your own kind, sided with the enemy." Tileni's eyes burned with determination. "I made my choice." The warriors opened fire. Tileni dodged, rolled, and returned fire. Her rifle shots struck one enemy down, then another. But they were too many. A plasma blast struck her shoulder, burning through her armor. She gritted her teeth and kept fighting. She threw the grenade. Boom! The explosion sent dirt and fire into the air. 2 more Zorthans fell, screaming. Only 2 left. Tileni charged forward, using the last of her strength. She struck one with her rifle, breaking his jaw. The last warrior lunged at her, but a gunshot rang out. Bang! Elias stood in the wreckage, holding a smoking pistol. The last Zorthan fell. Tileni gasped, barely able to stand. Elias rushed forward, catching her before she collapsed. Rescue at last. The radio crackled behind them. "This is the UHS Ironclad. We received your signal. Evac team en route." Elias grinned. "We did it." Tileni, still weak, smiled. "We survived." Elias looked at the sky. Human ships were coming. For the first time, he felt hope. Tileni closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Elias held onto her. "Stay with me, Tileni." The sound of approaching dropships filled the air. Help was finally here. The roar of engines filled the air as human dropships landed near the wreckage. The wind from their thrusters sent dust and debris flying. But to Elias, it was the best sight in the galaxy. Help had arrived. Tileni, injured and barely conscious, leaned against him. Despite everything, her golden eyes remained alert. "Elias," she whispered, "your people, they will not accept me." Elias tightened his grip on her shoulder. "They will. I'll make sure of it." Flaney exhaled weakly but said nothing. As the first dropship ramp lowered, a squad of heavily armed human soldiers rushed out, weapons raised. A voice called out, "Sergeant Elias Carter." Elias nodded. "Yeah, and I need a medic here now." The squad leader, a tall woman with a scar on her cheek, signaled to the medics. Two of them ran forward, carrying a stretcher. But then their eyes fell on Tilani. There was a long silence. One of the soldiers stepped forward. "Sir, that's a Zorthan." Elias gritted his teeth. "She's with me. She fought for me. She saved my life." The squad exchanged uneasy glances. To them, Zorthans were the enemy. Tilani wasn't just an alien. She was part of the species that had slaughtered their comrades. The squad leader narrowed her eyes. "You expect us to believe that?" Tilani coughed, her body weak. "I do not expect anything." Elias clenched his fists. "She's coming with us." The tension grew thick. The soldiers hesitated. Then the squad leader exhaled sharply. "Fine. Get her on the dropship. But if she tries anything," she tapped her rifle, "I won't hesitate." Elias nodded. "She won't." The medics carefully lifted Tilani onto the stretcher and carried her into the ship. Elias followed, his mind racing. Aboard the Ironclad. The UH Ironclad was a massive battlecruiser orbiting Vargas 9. It was a symbol of human strength, a fortress among the stars. As soon as the dropship landed inside the hangar, dozens of soldiers and officers gathered, whispering and staring. Elias ignored them and followed the medics as they wheeled Tilani toward the medical bay. A voice stopped him. "Sergeant Carter." Elias turned. A high-ranking officer stood before him. Commander Rains, the man in charge of the Ironclad. His piercing blue eyes focused on Tilani with suspicion. Elias saluted. "Sir." Rains folded his arms. "Report." Elias took a deep breath. "Mission failed, sir. The squad was wiped out. I barely survived." He glanced at Tilani. "She helped me escape." Rain's expression remained cold. "A Zorthan, helping a human." Elias nodded. "Yes, sir." She turned against her own kind. Rains looked at Tilani, then back at Elias. "And why should I believe that?" Tilani, still weak, slowly sat up on the stretcher. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Because I chose to stand by him." The room fell silent. Soldiers murmured among themselves. Rains stared at her for a long moment, then turned back to Elias. "She's a prisoner. Take her to the brig." Elias' stomach dropped. "Sir, she needs medical attention." "She'll get it," Rains said. "But she's still the enemy. We can't trust her." Elias felt anger rising. After everything, after all she sacrificed, they still saw her as a threat. "She saved me," Elias said through clenched teeth. "She fought against the Zorthans. That should mean something." Rains sighed. "Maybe. But for now, she's a risk." He turned to the guards. "Take her." The guards grabbed Tilani's arms. She didn't resist. Elias watched helplessly as they led her away. The interrogation. Hours later, Elias stood outside the interrogation room. Fists clenched. Behind the glass, Tilani sat alone, her wounds bandaged, but her hands cuffed. Across from her sat an intelligence officer, questioning her. Elias couldn't hear, but he could see the way they looked at her, like she was a monster. A voice startled him. "You really trust her?" Elias turned. "Commander Rains." Elias exhaled. "Yes." Rains studied him. "Why?" Elias hesitated, then spoke. "Because she made a choice, a real one. Not out of fear, not for survival, but because she believed in something more." Rains said nothing for a moment. Then he sighed. "You know what will happen if you're wrong." Elias nodded. "Yeah, but I'm not." Rains exhaled. "We'll see." He turned and walked away, leaving Elias alone. Elias looked back into the interrogation room. Tilani sat there, calm, and unwavering. He wouldn't abandon her. She had chosen him, and now he would fight for her. Delaney sat alone in the cold, dimly lit interrogation room. The metal cuffs around her wrists felt tight, a constant reminder that she was not welcome here. Across the table, Lieutenant Graves, the intelligence officer, studied her with narrowed eyes. "Tell me again," he said, "why did you betray your people?" Delaney held his gaze, her golden eyes unwavering. "I did not betray them. I chose to fight for what was right." Graves scoffed. "And what's right for a Zorthan?" Delaney exhaled slowly. "Not war, not slavery, not destruction." She leaned forward. "Your people believe we are all the same, but we are not." Graves didn't answer immediately. He just stared at her as if searching for a lie. Finally, he stood up. "We'll see about that." He left the room, locking the door behind him. Elias takes a stand. Outside, Elias waited, arms crossed. As soon as Graves stepped out, he spoke. "She's telling the truth." Graves sighed. "You really believe that?" Elias clenched his fists. "Yes." Commander Rains approached, listening quietly. Graves shook his head. "She's still the enemy, Carter. You can't just trust her because she helped you." "She didn't have to help me," Elias argued. "She could have let me die. Instead, she fought against her own kind." Rains raised a hand, silencing them. "Enough." He looked at Elias. "You're willing to take responsibility for her?" Elias nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir." Rains studied him for a long moment. Then he made his decision. A risky deal. An hour later, the door to Tilani's cell hissed open. Elias stepped inside. Tilani looked up. "They do not trust me." Elias smirked. "Yeah, humans can be stubborn." She tilted her head. "And you?" Elias pulled out a small data pad and placed it on the table. "They're letting me take responsibility for you." Tilani blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means you're still under watch, but you won't be in a cell," Elias explained. "You'll be with me." Tilani studied him for a long moment. "They do not trust me, but they trust you." Elias nodded. "I gave them my word." She exhaled. "Then I will not break it." Elias grinned. "Good, because we've got bigger problems." Tilani frowned. "What do you mean?" Elias's expression turned serious. "The Zorthans know you're alive." The Zorthan threat. Aboard a massive Zorthan warship, Supreme Commander Volker stood before a holographic display of the UH ironclad. One of his officers saluted. "We have confirmed it, sir. Tilani is aboard the human ship." Volker's eyes burned with rage. "She has disgraced our kind." The officer hesitated. "What are your orders, Commander?" Volker clenched his fists. "We cannot allow a traitor to live." He turned toward the command crew. "Prepare the fleet. We will destroy the ironclad." The calm before the storm. Back on the ironclad, Elias led Tilani through the corridors. Every soldier they passed stared at her with suspicion. Some whispered. Others simply tightened their grips on their weapons. Tilani kept her head high. Elias noticed her silence. "You okay?" She nodded. "I have faced worse." Elias smirked. "You're tougher than you look." Before she could reply, the emergency sirens blared. A voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "Enemy fleet detected. Zorthan warships approaching." Elias and Tilani froze. She turned to him. "They are coming for me." Elias cursed under his breath. "Looks like we don't have much time." A desperate plan. In the ironclad's war room, alarms flashed red as officers scrambled for battle positions. Commander Rains studied the incoming fleet. 3 warships, twice our size, heavily armed. Elias stood next to him, his jaw clenched. "They're not here for a battle, sir. They're here for her." Rains glanced at Tilani. "Then they won't stop until they have her." Tilani stepped forward. "I can speak to them." Rains raised an eyebrow. "And say what?" I know Volker, she said. He sees me as a disgrace. But I can make him listen. Elias crossed his arms. And if he doesn't? Tilani's expression hardened. Then we fight. The final choice. Minutes later, the Ironclad's main communication channel connected to the Zorthan flagship. Volker's face appeared on the holographic screen. His red eyes locked onto Tilani. So, the traitor still lives, he growled. Tilani stepped forward. Volker, this war must end. Volker laughed coldly. There is no peace for those who betray their own kind. Elias narrowed his eyes. She made a choice, a real one. Volker sneered. Then she will die with the humans. The screen went dark. Rains turned to his officers. Shields up. Prepare for combat. Elias looked at Tilani. Guess he didn't listen. Seleni's golden eyes burned with determination. Then we will make him listen. The battle alarms blared across the UH Ironclad as red lights flashed in every corridor. The enemy was here. On the bridge, Commander Rains stood tall, staring at the holographic screen. The Zorthan fleet had arrived. 3 massive warships, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. They're charging their weapons, an officer shouted. Rains gritted his teeth, raised the shields. Prepare to return fire. Elias stood beside him, heart pounding. He turned to Tilani. Are you sure there's no way to stop this? Tilani's golden eyes darkened. Volker has chosen war. There is no turning back now. Rains clenched his fists. Then we fight. The battle begins. Outside the Ironclad, the first Zorthan warship fired. A blazing energy blast streaked through space, smashing into the Ironclad's shields. The ship shook violently as sparks flew from control panels. We can't take many hits like that, one of the officers yelled. Rains pointed at the enemy ship. Return fire. The Ironclad's cannons roared, unleashing bright blue laser blasts. The shots struck the Zorthan warship's hull, tearing through its outer armor. Elias grabbed onto a railing as the ship trembled. He looked at Tilani. We need a plan, or we won't last long. Tilani's mind raced. Then an idea formed. Take me to the hangar, she said. Elias frowned. What? I can get aboard Volker's ship, she explained. If I confront him directly, I may be able to stop this. Rains hesitated. That's insane. You'll be walking into the lion's den. Tilani's voice was firm. It is the only way. Elias sighed, then smirked. Then I'm coming with you. Tilani's eyes widened. Elias. No arguments, he interrupted. We started this together. We'll finish it together. Rains looked at them, then nodded. You have 5 minutes. Take a stealth shuttle and get it done. Infiltrating the Zorthan flagship. The stealth shuttle slipped through the battlefield unnoticed. Elias and Tilani sat inside, suited up in lightweight armor. Elias gripped the controls. Almost there. Tilani took a deep breath. She had faced death before, but this was different. This time, she wasn't alone. The shuttle latched onto the side of the Zorthan flagship. Elias grabbed his rifle. Ready? Tilani nodded. Let's go. The doors slid open, and they stepped into the ship. Face to face with Volker. The corridors of the flagship were dark and metallic. Zorthan guards rushed toward them, weapons raised. Tilani moved fast, striking the first guard with lightning speed. Elias fired his rifle, taking down another. Alarms blared. More guards approached. Elias gritted his teeth. We need to move. Tilani led the way, guiding Elias through the ship's twisting halls. Finally, they reached the command room. The doors slid open. Inside, Supreme Commander Volker stood, waiting. He smirked. I knew you would come, traitor. Tilani stepped forward. Call off this attack, Volker. There is still a chance for peace. Volker laughed coldly. Peace. You disgrace our kind. You fight beside humans. You are nothing. Elias raised his rifle. I wouldn't insult her if I were you. Volker sneered. You think I fear you, human. Elias smirked. No, but you should. Suddenly, Tilani lunged forward. Voker barely dodged as she struck with incredible speed. Their battle began, a clash of skill, strength, and fury. Tilani fought with all her might, her moves precise and deadly. But Voker was strong, and he had trained for war his entire life. Elias saw an opening. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot hit Voker's shoulder. He roared in pain, stumbling back. Tilani didn't waste the chance. She struck his chest, knocking him to the ground. She grabbed his collar. This war is over. Voker gritted his teeth. You would betray your own people for them. Tilani's eyes hardened. I fight for what is right, not for you. Elias smirked. Now, call off your fleet. Voker growled but reluctantly pressed a button on the control panel. A voice crackled through the ironclad speakers. The Zorthan fleet is retreating. The end of the war. Back on the ironclad, cheers erupted as the Zorthan warships began to pull back. Rain stood in the command center, watching the battle end. He exhaled deeply. They did it. Minutes later, the stealth shuttle returned. Elias and Tilani stepped out. Rains crossed his arms. That was reckless. Elias grinned, but it worked. Rains shook his head but smirked. I suppose it did. Tilani turned to Elias. Thank you. He raised an eyebrow. For what? For believing in me. Elias smiled. Always. A new beginning. Days later, Tilani stood on the deck of the ironclad, staring at the stars. Elias joined her. So, what now? She thought for a moment. I do not know. My people will not accept me. But I do not belong anywhere else. Elias chuckled. You belong here. Tilani glanced at him. With humans. Elias smirked. With this human, at least. She smiled softly. The war was over. A new future had begun. And for the first time, Tilani knew she was not alone.